can dig deeper into that point because one thing we can see recently, and I think maybe it also connects in my opinion, it also connects to what you just said, that we observe high unemployment and slow wage growth, especially in the southern countries, also currently. And in your understanding, is this a contribution of past economic policy making in the European Union? As you just said, like the enlargement of Europe, or could you think of any other reasons for what we can currently observe in southern European countries?
No. I think the main problem, existing problem, is this. Well, we of course we are having consequences from the enlargement of Europe for these two countries. This is true, but well, the impact of the funds, the European funds in our economy are still very important. I made a study, and well, in average, we can say that between 1% and 2%, there is an impact between 1% and 2% in our economic growth, annual economic growth, coming out from the European funds. So it's a mathematical conclusion. So we would have a rate of growth that would be less than the present rate of growth, less at least 1% or 2%. Instead of having, for instance, 2% of growth, we would have 1% or even close to 0%. So this is the impact, the positive impact of the European funds in our economy. And so this is really very important.
Yeah.
But what the main problem, and that's why I spoke about the reforms that are necessary in Europe, is I did not speak about this reform, it's mutualization. It's to have the problem of common debt in Europe, and with this common debt in Europe, Europe could, of course, finance countries that are not in good shape with a very low rate of interest, and in some cases without paying interest. What we do, for instance, for Madeira and for Açores in Portugal, well, in Açores in Madeira, people from the continent, sometimes we are financing the people in Madeira, or were financing, nowadays we are not, but we were financing people in Madeira and people in Açores. It's necessary a mechanism of the same kind in Europe. And the Germans used to be against that. And they still are, some of them are against that. But they have already to approve a certain kind of mutualization of the debt during the pandemic.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, they accepted to have a certain kind of mutualization of the debt. Even Lady Merkel, she was against that in 1910, 1911, 1912, totally against that. She had a Minister of Finance who was totally against that. But she approved that. She was even at the time while she was still Prime Minister, she was Chancellor, and she approved the mutualization mechanism. So that's inevitable, because if we want to have a monetary union, you should have also an economic union. And if you want to have an economic union, you should have, when we have critical situations, a transfer mechanism of funds from the rich countries to the poor countries. That's obvious. Anyone intelligent, with moderate coefficients of intelligence, understands that. That's a problem that should be resolved, and it is going to be resolved. Because what is the problem? Present problem, for instance, for more developed countries in Europe, like for instance France and Germany, and they could have doubts between when there are critical moments, they have this amount. Between making a community only of rich countries and, well, not helping southern countries of Europe, or having supporting the present European project.
Mm-hmm.
You can have doubts between what we call traditional conception of the Europe, which has to do with Spain, Portugal, of course, France, Holland, etc., all these countries, or the other conception which would be, well, we should open much more to the eastern countries, because they have also quite good productivity, they have lower wages, they have better opportunities in terms of new investments with higher rentabilities, etc. But the problem is that it's the importance of the market, of the consumer market. And the traditional Europe is important in terms of consumer market for Germany, for France, etc. Even in Spain, Portugal, of course, Netherlands, this kind of countries, Belgium, etc. So the old Europe, in terms of consumption, is more important, is still more important than the new Europe, the Eastern Europe. So they did us. So, they need to consider both things. The old Europe with the new Europe. And then there is the political problem. If we want Europe to survive, and Western democracy to survive in Europe, we cannot rely only in the United States of America. Of course, I'm pro-American and I like the United States of America a lot. And when I'm speaking about the United States of America, I trust much more nowadays the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. I must tell that openly. Because the problem is the Republican Party nowadays is not controlled by center-right majority. It's controlled by extreme right majority. And so it's if President Trump wins the election, he has a conception of power very close to Marine Le Pen and very close to Putin and very close to this kind of people. There are not big difference in the conception of power between the conception of power of President Trump and the conception of power of President Putin. And I even suspect they are friends. So they have other things in common that I'm not going to explain. So, because for some people it would be difficult to understand, and they would never try to understand, even if it is true. And even if we present the proofs, they would not say. They would say that they are not true, good proofs. And if even we demonstrate, like for instance, it's proved that he has tried to interfere in the elections for Georgia. And there are people that say, no, he has not tried to interfere. And there is a phone call that everybody has had access to this phone call for him to the governor of Georgia asking for more votes. Well, so, but they don't believe. They say, oh, this is not really true, you know. Well, so I think that we cannot rely. We must rely on ourselves.
Okay, so that's a challenge for Europe.
Yes, that's
in the future.
We must rely on ourselves. Of course, we should be allies to the United States, work with the United States. We have the same values, globally speaking, and but we can not trust what is going to happen in the future in the United States.
So maybe just to how to connect, as you said, the expansion to the east and the challenge ahead. So how can Europe try to tackle the challenge of becoming, as you said, more independent, but at the same time handling the issue of integrating the East, of expanding? Expanding,
but I would not expand too much. You know?
Yeah, okay.
I'm not in favor of that. I'm in favor of expanding too much like the North and Ukraine because they have a very important role in the war against Russia. and we owe that to the Ukrainians. Well, not eventually. Well, we should think about Moldavia or something like that, but or eventually, I don't know, Montenegro, or Albania. But I have doubts. You see.
Okay.
Because we should consolidate Europe like it is, with Ukraine, with Macedon North, and you should consolidate democracy in Europe.
Okay.
And only after that we should make other enlargements. That's my preference, you see. And of course, I want to stress this. I think this is very important. The alliance with the United States is really very important.
Yes, for sure.
And we need them. And I hope the Democrats will win the next presidential elections, because I think that is very important for us to win the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I think that some people is making a mistake, because it's true that the Middle East, the situation in the Middle East is serious, but I think it's more the challenge of Ukraine is even more important than the challenge of the Middle East presently.
For Europe?
For Europe.
Okay.
Because the Middle East, I think we are not going, maybe I'm wrong, to have a generalized war in the Middle East. I think Iran does not want to enter seriously, and directly they are in the war, supporting Amado, supporting Hezbollah, etc. But directly they will not enter into the war. And Russia does not want to enter in that war. They have other priorities, and China does not want to enter that war. So I think that we are not going to have, for the moment, a generalized war in the Middle East. And so if it is not a generalized war, Israel takes over the power, solves the problem.
Okay.
By themselves, with the support of the United States. Israel solves the problem with the support of the United States. Because we are not going to have a generalized war. With Ukraine, it's much more difficult. Much more difficult. We need a much higher support, financial support, to win the war. And it's determinant. It's determinant. Because if we don't win the war in Ukraine, it's inevitable a third world war. It's inevitable, because Putin is not going to stop. If he wins the war in Ukraine, he's going to try to do something with the Baltic republics, he's going to do something with Poland, he's going to do other things with other countries in Europe, and we don't know where he's going to stop. And so, like Hitler. So we cannot consider the hypothesis of not winning the war in Ukraine. Because not winning the war in Ukraine, in realistic terms, means that it is inevitable a third world war, in my modest opinion.
Thank you so much for
in a long-term perspective.
Yeah.
In a long-term perspective. I'm not saying tomorrow, but in a long-term perspective. It's different from the Middle East.
As you said, like maybe something that's interesting for the audience, for us. As you said, stabilizing democracy is a really important, like it's a challenge in Europe, and maybe like in my opinion it's also related to what's going on in Ukraine right now, because we really want to stabilize our democracy. So maybe you can like just briefly explain which role economic discrepancy between the different states in the European Union plays in stabilizing the democracy, and maybe like just briefly give us like an overview of that challenge and how we can try to solve it, how we can overcome it, and yeah, maybe we can end with that. And an outlook on how we stabilize democracy in the European Union, how we overcome economic discrepancy, and how we can work on that in the future.
Well, it's true that it is necessary to work on that sense to decrease the difference, the existing difference in terms of economic development in Europe. But for that purpose, it's necessary as I have already said, to have a transfer mechanism of resources from the rich countries to the poor countries.
Okay.
But an intelligence mechanism, well, what does that mean? It's not an automatic mechanism without reasons to put in practice this automatic mechanism. It's when there are critical situations, when it is necessary to, we see that a country is in a difficult situation, it's necessary to have a kind of European monetary fund for Europe.
Okay.
It's necessary to have, instead of having IMF, an European monetary fund to support the countries in having difficulties in the certain moments. I think this is something that can be really very, very important. Then to finish with, we have regulations in Europe concerning, convergence criteria in what concerns the ratio between the public deficit and the gross domestic product, and the ratio between the public debt as a whole and the gross domestic product. We should have other criteria to complete these criteria, as for instance, the rate of unemployment compares with the average of Europe. So a country that has a rate of unemployment that is higher than something like 50% to the average of the rate of unemployment in Europe. The average is, for instance, let us assume 9%, 10%, and the country has something like 15% or something like that. Then it would be necessary to be more flexible in what concerns the ratio concerning the deficit of the budget, the budgetary deficit, and so that it would be possible to have more public investment. And then, if, for instance, there should be another ratio that it is important. It's the percentage of people with per capita revenue inferior to a quarter of the average of the revenue per capita of the in average in Europe.
Okay, so that's somehow an inequality measure.
Inequality.
Yes.
If there is a country that has a big percentage of people earning less than 25% of the average of the European Union, then you should also be more reasonable in one concerns the other ratios, namely the ratio of the deficit of the gross domestic, the ratio of the deficit of public deficits vis-a-vis the gross domestic product. And then in those cases, difficult cases, all the public investment that was done concerning investments, European investments, for instance, Europeans that have been approved by Europe, by the European Commission. You approve, for instance, a new infrastructure for TGV, or if it is not a TGV, a new airport or something in Portugal. And Portugal is in such a situation of big discrimination in what concerns revenues. So all these public investments that should be done by Portugal, by the Portuguese budget, should not be considered for the budgetary ratio.
Okay.
For the ratio concerning the ratio between the deficit of the budgetary deficit and the gross domestic product. So we should rethink the European criteria for the European convergence criteria, take into consideration what we have said. So I'm in favor of that. Of course, I'm not what we call a liberal. A liberal, not according to the American approach, because a liberal is someone from the left in the United States of America. but from the European approach. I'm not neoliberal. So someone who thinks that it is necessary to finish with the presence of the state in the economy and to have only the market functioning. I'm not. I'm a social democrat. I'm a member of the Socialist Party, but I'm a social democrat. And so I would belong to the moderate wing of the Democratic Party of the United States of America. I would be the SPD, for instance. So I'm speaking with Germans, so like that to understand me very well. I would be in the SPD, in the moderate wing of the SPD, but I would be in the SPD. And so you can always say, well, all his conceptions were influenced by his ideology, which is totally true. Although I try to be realistic and pragmatic at the same time. And well, that's what I have to say, and I don't want to make use of your time more.
No, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
And it has been a great pleasure to be with you, as a matter of fact.
Thank you so much. And I think now we can end with some great ideas about the future of the European Union. Thank you a lot for that.
Well, thank you very much too. See you one of these days, I hope.